So we are now recording. Welcome to our end of year eData webinar. It almost feels a little surreal that we're almost halfway through June and certainly almost at the end of the program year. So in keeping with the timing of today being June 14th and the data system closing in approximately 1 month, we wanted to bring you all together to be able to answer any questions you may have at this time of year, and then also provide an overview that will just give an outline for the expectations for the end of the year, some do's and don'ts. For those of you that have been running in the eData world for a while, many of these things will just simply serve as reminders. But since we only do this once a year, we feel it's worth the time to review the process. At the end of today's webinar, we will have time to respond to some questions. So we'll set aside those until after we do our presentation. And then after the question and answers, going to have and request that those of you who have IET programming at your agency stay on for a little bit of a special end of webinar presentation we have just for you, which is just some reminders and a specific discussion surrounding IET data entry. So that's just for those of you that have an IET, and I'll give that reminder again when we get to that part of the webinar. So formally again, I'd like to welcome all of you to the webinar. My name, of course, is Michael McCarty. I think I see all friendly faces and names. And joining us as well from our project is Steve Linus. So we're going to walk you through the specifics for the end of the year considerations. And we will start with just a little reminder here that I think most of you are aware of, which is that version 3 of the template is now available, posted online at its normal spot on the PA Adult Ed Resources website. And the biggest thing with the template really for version 3 is going to be most meaningful for those of you that have a 259 contract for this program year, which I think is just a handful of you. Most of the other changes are small. I did put a note here, as you see at the last bullet on the screen, that there are some new security settings that is causing causing a little bit of a headache for all of us, honestly. It's just another layer to work through to get the template to function normally. So what I would say is, if you are having any issues with those settings, of course, please do reach out to us. We have set up successfully a few Zoom meetings already with folks, walked through the settings and gotten folks up to speed and working. What I would also say is, unless you have a 259 contract, you can continue to use version 2 of the template if it's functioning well for you, until and when you get a chance to get kind of lined up and hooked up with version 3. So there's some flexibility there, and hopefully everyone can keep moving forward as we work through the new settings. We are in the process also of updating the template guide. There is a guide online on the template webpage that contains information about the template guide, and it will be updated sometime this summer, and it will also include more information about those security settings. That is something we'll likely have to deal with all the time moving forward every time we get a new template. But hopefully once we get those settings set, they should stay in your template access specifically and be there for the duration, not something you have to shouldn't have to do that every time. So that's the template. Any questions on that? Of course, as always, let us know. eData specifically, this is the review part for many of you, but we'll go ahead and just review the dates. So for this program year, this is going to be a same date of closure as we've had in previous program years. So we're looking at July 15th is the date that eData will close. Yes, that is a Saturday. But the idea is that eData will close at the close of business on July 15th, and after that, you will not be able to enter any data. That's, of course, about a month from now. So we'd like to bring up some ideas and considerations for things to think about to be prepared for that close date when it arrives. Forms for next year are going to come up also, and that will be on July 1st. This is always a tricky time of year. You're transitioning from one program year to the next, while at the same time your programming programming in many cases continues uninterrupted. And there'll just be sort of a mental transition, if you will, as of July 1st. Any forms that you collect, any information you collect will be entered into eData next year. So you want to make sure a documentation that you have starting July 1st is well organized and collected and prepared for eventual entry into eData. And those forms that I have here on the screen that are available July 1st will be available on or around July 1st. We shoot for that as closely as we can. And we want to have those up there available for you so that you can start printing those out and using those for your orientations that take place July 1st and onward. As you can see on the screen, of course, from July 1st to the 15th, we kind of call that the final data entry period. You're entering things that have already happened. You're not generating any new data. You're going to be, I shouldn't say that way. You're not generating any new data for the 22-23 program year in this case, only for the following program year. So from July 1st to July 15th in eData, you'll have access to this year's data entry, 22-23, and you'll just simply be given that 2 weeks to wrap up and add anything that was generated at the end, through the end of June. There will be data check reports that will go out on July 5th, and those will be slightly delayed. We normally do the first Monday of the month, but in the case of July with the holiday, we're going to do it the Wednesday after the 4th of July, which of course is a Tuesday. So we'll send those on July 5th to both you, your agency, and your advisor at the division. And those will be the final data check reports for the year. And we'll talk about some data checking considerations here in a couple of minutes. And then finally, of course, to wrap up the program year in eData is what's called the data validation process. There is more information in that process because that's information that you submit directly to the division. And that is in Policy Highlight C130. It's the last page, describes exactly what's required for that. And there are complementary data validation queries that are available on the data validation page and in the template. So the information you may need for that will be there. And you'll find the information about how to complete that process in C130. One thing that I did not note before we move on to the next slide here is the forms for next year will have some updates that are what I would describe as subtle updates. So for example, the adult intake form for 23-24 will no longer have gender, it will just have sex. So it's the field's still there, the field's still in the same place it's always been, but it's just been renamed. The period of participation enrollment date field will be renamed the period of participation start date field. We did a review back in the spring to try to come up with more consistent and sensible language in the eData system. We made some changes there that you'll see starting next year. And so the forms are going to reflect those changes. And we'll share more about what eData looks like and how those fields are going to work, or at least how they're renamed. We'll share that when eData opens here later this summer or early fall. To-do list, things to keep in mind. So this is that wrap up period here between July 1st and July 15th, really between now actually and July 15th. We certainly want you to add all completed 22-23 adult intakes to eData. Those are considered reportable students, even if they have 0 hours of instruction. The federal government wants us as a state to report any and all individuals who expressed interest in adult ed, even if that interest only led to them filling out an adult intake form and nothing more. So those adult intakes should be entered into the eData system. If you have an intake, put it in. The next 2 points, resolving near matches and resolving adult record deletion requests, those should be done as soon as possible. Don't wait till July 14th, because that won't work at all for near matches. Those of you who are used to doing those know that those need to be resolved overnight. So we won't really be able to do much for you necessarily. It's really risky to wait till the last minute for near matches. So just take care of those as soon as you can. You can check those immediately. There's a near match button right underneath the adults button in the template on the main page. and you can check your near matches there. Just reach out to us, say you have near matches to resolve, give us the name, and we'll take it from there. And then, of course, adult record deletion requests. We may ask you why you are requesting to delete an adult, because if you had the information to add the adult to the system, you probably should have them in most of the time, but we will want to work with you on resolving those deletion requests. And if you're wondering what that is, the eData system allows an adult record to be marked for deletion. And when we see that, we will just have to follow up with you and see about that. Again, what are the reasons for that? Last two bullets here on the page are really just reminders for your data. First, to do a download of exported data. You are likely probably doing that ongoing anyway. Some of you maybe do that once a week, some maybe once a month. But we certainly encourage everyone, when you feel that you have finished your data entry for the year, but before July 15th, export and save a copy of the exported data from eData. And I have in this italics here a sample renaming of the zipped file that you can take out. The file itself is normally, as you likely all know, extractreport.zip. It's a zipped folder that you have those files that you export. You can rename that file, of course, in Windows. And I just gave an example here on screen of what you could name it: 22-23 full year data, something memorable. And you can put that file wherever you'd like. As you know, the data files must be in your data folder, but the zip file that contains those data files, you can store that for safekeeping wherever it makes sense to you on your machine. And to go along with that, and in addition to that, we would want you and encourage you to save a copy of the populated template with performance reports if you run those, so that you have something that you can just quickly open that copy of the template, and you'll have your data ready to go to run reports or do other things as needed. So that's definitely something that you're going to want to consider doing, both of those, just in case. And the reason we have them as separate ideas is the exported data in the zip file, that's if something happens to your template. Let's say it's August 1st. Something wonky happens in your template, you're not sure why. You can download a new fresh copy of the template. And if you have that exported data from eData, the only way you're going to get that on an August 1st date is to be able to have that stored locally on your machine. And of course, for those of you with larger agencies, multiple sites, you may want to encourage multiple staff members to do both of those steps so that you have multiple backup copies for use across your agency. And of course, the last point on the screen here, which is that eData will close on close of business on July 15th, and there will not be any access, no data entry, no downloading of exported files. As I've mentioned, nothing will be available to you on July 15th until the system opens. Sometime we're targeting August 15th at this point, but that is not a promise. That's just a goal. So you'll be in the dark for at least a month. And that's why we want you to think about that now and back up as much as possible now. And I do see a couple questions in the chat. Let me catch up on those real quick. Yes, so that's true. So Maritza says she had a couple marked for deletion, but they were never deleted. We don't get a flag, so to speak, when that happens. It's not part of an automated process. So if you mark someone for deletion, best bet is to follow up with us, much like a near match, and say, hey, I marked so-and-so for deletion. And then also I would encourage you to provide a reason why when you reach out to us. So if you currently have or have had any marked for deletion adults, please do reach out to us. Email is probably the best way, but certainly you're always welcome to call. And when you do reach out, just provide us the reason why you want those folks to be deleted. We sometimes have to check with the division to see if the reasoning is valid. I got a couple other questions here. Amy says, do we need new intakes for rollover students? And what time is considered close of business on July 15th? So I'll do the close of business question first, Amy, and that is 5 p.m. So great question. I know Saturday is kind of a weird thing, close of business, but that's a great question. And then the other part of your question, Amy, do we need new intakes for rollover students? Well, that depends. A rollover student for next year will fall into one of two categories: continuing student or returning student. For continuing students, you do not need a new intake. For returning students, you do. And the distinction between the two is a continuing student has a no more than 90-day gap in instruction. A returning student's coming back after a more than 90-day gap in instruction. So if you think about periods of participation and the conversations that we've had around those concepts, if a student comes back after being gone for more than 90 days in the middle of a program year, the idea is you get a new intake from them. That's what you use to create the new period of participation in eData. And while you're doing that, you're also probably evaluating and seeing, do we need a new assessment, and those kind of questions. So the idea is that concept applies across program years as well. I'll give you an example for like a continuing student. If you have someone who's attending classes right now, it's June 14th, and they just continue attending, they're attending in July, August, that's what's known as a continuing student. Because they never left and they don't have a new period of participation, they will simply be entered with the intake that you already have on file for them with their what's known as their current period of participation. If they're a returning student, let's say they're attending now, but then they stop out tomorrow, June 15th, and they don't come back until the end of September. That would, of course, be more than 90 days. For that student, you would need a new intake, but you would, of course, get that intake at the end of September. So that's a good question, Amy. There's some considerations there. So you think of it this way: you only need new intakes if the individual has been gone from your program when they start the program year for more than 90 days. And I'm going to talk about a couple of reports here in a minute that you can run that will help you evaluate that question. Rosa, you raised your hand. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, or?
Michael, I wanted to ask you if I have a student who's been rolled over since 2017 and it's the same intake over and over again. Can I redo that intake with her?
So she's just continuing over a really long period of time?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my understanding is the idea of the intake is you might have to double check and see if there's any updates to her demographic information. But the program year details information that's at the bottom of that adult details tab in the adult record is really the adult intake information when they started that period of participation.
Stays the same.
Stays the same, which periods of participation as a concept, as an idea, actually can go across multiple program years. So if you all probably have a student or students that have been attending your program for maybe years, and they just always attend. And so they may be on the same period of participation that they started back in 2019. And so that's what's kind of weird is we have to have a period of participation start date effective July 1st or later for everyone for every program year, just because we have to put each year's data into different silos. But the idea is that when we report students, they're actually on potentially the same period of participation, which is why every evaluation, including those continuing and returning students, comes back to the 90-day absence. And I know that concept's a little weird, especially if you're hearing this for the first time. So if some of you are kind of new to that and what I'm saying is a little bit confusing, please feel free to follow up with me later and we'll have a discussion. And I think if we review some specific situations and specific student scenarios, then it'll start to click and make more sense.
Yeah, the reason why I would like to get a new intake because of the changes on the intake, because an intake 5 years ago is different from the intakes that we have now.
Yes. And so if there are fields that are in eData currently that did not exist several years ago, you'll of course want to get an update to the old intake for that. So like I said, you might be pulling out the old update, or excuse me, the old intake rather, and you might update, of course, and say to the student, can you check the demographic information? Is this still all the same? And then you might also say to the same student, can you please check the new fields down below and get responses on those?
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Very good question. You're welcome. Okay, and I'm just going to catch up on a couple more. It looks like we have a couple. So what would be a valid reason to delete a student? is Lauren's question. And what I would say is that's not always up to me, so I can't give you the full answer. Sometimes I have to talk to the division about that. But a valid reason to delete a student, probably something like the student was a similar name. Like, let's say you have a Juan Gonzalez, but you have 3 of them as rollovers, and you roll over the wrong one. So you roll over the wrong, literally the wrong student. We want to take out that student and put in the correct student. That would be a reason to delete an adult record, for example. There's others. We could go into the weeds on that, but I think in the interest of everyone's time, let's just, if you have a delete request, just send it our way and we'll process that with you. Is there a standard? So Susan asks, is there a standard or recommended period of time when a continuing student may need a new intake? For example, if they stop and start attending less than 90 days. So that, I think, Susan, hopefully we addressed your question when we were talking with Rosa and her question there, because I think the new intake really is, it's been more than 90 days, you get a new intake. That's really the answer to that. Daisy says, for your example, continuing students that roll over in the new year start the new year off with 0 hours. Is this correct? That is true for the current year. When it comes to testing students in the new program year, so stay tuned, Daisy. I have some more information for you with the assessments question in a moment. And okay, I think we're caught up in chat, but we can double check that here in a second. Let's go to the next section. So I think this is probably going to start answering maybe and filling in some gaps, some other questions you may have. And that is, do not exit all adults in eData. Those of you that have done this for a while have heard us preach that in the past. It is true that for a student to be eligible for a cohort, an outcome cohort, measurable skill gain, for example, they do need to have an exit date. But that is not something, if you add a bunch of exit dates, that doesn't mean all of your students are eligible. The statistician is going to check that and catch that anyways. So the exit dates should be added for those students that need one. And the criteria used for that is, again, tied back to the 90 days. So there's a handy report in the template on the data checking page near the top that says adults with no instructional hours and within so many days. It defaults to 90, if I'm not mistaken, but you can put in any number of days you'd like. And by running that report, you can see students that should be marked as exited because they've been out of your program for more than 90 days. So that's the quick check that you can run after going through the adults and just say, okay, who do I need an exit date for? And that's a process that you can start running now. When you're in mid-June, when you're wrapping up the year, you can start running that report to see who's been gone for more than 90 days. Remember that adding an exit date to an adult record in eData will lock the record and will prevent you from being able to alter or change or add data to it. So it's really important to consider adding exit dates once you're confident that all information, especially attendance, has been added for that specific adult or group of adults. A couple other quick reminders. These are just kind of odds and ends. Check and update your staff's years of experience. You'll be rolling over those staff potentially next year, so you'll want to update those years of experience. And then check for correct counting in all of your adult records. Finally, the 2 last bullet points on here speak to the data checks I've mentioned a couple times, which you'll get in the email from us on July 5th, but you certainly, as you all know, likely you don't need to wait until July 5th for that. You can run those data checks in your local template at any time. And keep in mind that you probably have a lengthy list of items on your data check right now. It's the end of the year. You've got potentially hundreds, if not for the bigger agencies of you out there, over 1,000 students. So you're going to have a ton of things. Some of you have 2 pages of data checks, and that's expected. You're basically never going to have nothing on a data check. Real world happens, things don't line up. And that gets the point here. You see the first bullet point, which is a data check is just an opportunity to check items that fall generally into one of 2 categories. You're either going to be solving errors, and errors, of course, are things you can fix. They're the uh-ohs, they're the why did I do that moments, and you get in there and you change them and fix them. There's also issues that might happen, which is students without a post-test. They have enough hours, but no post-test, but they disappeared. There's not much control you have over that. It's what's done is done, the student's gone. That would just be documentation, maybe writing some documentation in the student file saying that missing a post-test because XYZ in the case notes, that kind of thing. So that's really the two things, and you've heard us talk about these data checks from that perspective for a while now. Just remember that they are checks. I know many of you have to answer to administrators that want those data check forms to be completely blank, but you can certainly share that sort of solving errors versus document the issues perspective with them. And then just want to make a note, the final bullet point here. You will have situations with shared adult records that sometimes cause adults to show up in specific data checks where the actions of the other agency and the activities that student did at the shared agency will impact your data check. A perfect example is if you have a student and you have them in person only, but then you see them on a data check saying they're missing their distance learner checkbox. You say, well, that's odd. We don't have them as a remote student. Check first to see if you have one of those, if they're shared with another agency. If they are, then it's very likely that other agency has some remote hours, and that is what's triggering the data check. So being the check that it is, you've done your duty, so to speak, by simply checking to make sure that for your agency specifically, that student does or does not have remote hours. And of course, then checking to make sure that the distance learner checkbox follows that situation. So that's just a little quirk some folks have noticed, and it's just a shared agency thing. So if you see that, don't panic. Again, with questions on any of those, feel free to give us a call. Some more end of year reminders. This gets now to some questions there were about some assessments and how you manage that. There's a tricky period, sort of a blackout period, if you will, a gray area that happens in July and August with students that are continuing with your agency. So now is the time to put thought towards what is that going to look like? Who might we need to give an assessment to based on hours and instruction, and just what is appropriate? You of course want to follow all the guidelines for appropriate post-testing and pre-testing. But I think Daisy, you had a question about this. So when you hit July 1st and you have a student continuing with you, if that student had hours in this year, the one we're sitting in right now, they may hit their post-testing time sometime in July or August. You won't know that through just the tools you normally have available to you via eData, of course. You won't have eData reports you can run for the hours that the student's accumulating in July and August. You may have a local database. Many of you have a local backup database, like I think you have, there's Salesforce, there's Laces, there's other items that you use, databases to keep track. So if you have those, of course, you can fall back on those. If you don't, you may want to consider running reports right now to see students who may be close to the number of hours needed for post-testing, and anticipate that if they say get 10 more hours in July, you would want to be prepared to post-test them. What we're trying to avoid is a situation where you're entering data in eData in October, and you're putting your students for July and August in, and you realize, uh-oh, we don't have an assessment we can roll over. It was more than 150 days old, and we never gave them an assessment for the purpose of assessing in July or August, and now we're stuck. We have no assessment for that adult for the whole year, no pretest. So that's the situation that we're giving you these ideas about, because that's what we want to try to avoid. Because now's when the time you can take action and plan ahead. And everybody's situation is a little bit different. Everybody tracks assessments a little bit different. So much like some of the other topics we've covered, if you have some concerns about that and you're really wondering what to do, please do reach out to us. We can review your specific situation. And as we review it, then we can help you come up with a plan of maybe what resources you have, what tools you can use to monitor and make sure you don't miss any of those students in July and August before eData opens. The comment on here too, Daisy, you raised your hand. Was that a follow-up then?
Yes, thank you, Michael. So just to clarify then, or to confirm, so in the example that you just gave, so if we have a student who, for example, will hit those 30 hours this program year, and then for the next program year, once they accumulate like those 10 hours to equal essentially the 40 hours for the CASAS testing, for example, then we're allowed to post-test them, or is it until they've hit 40 hours in that program year?
The assessment hours as far as the evaluation of when it's appropriate to post-test crosses the program year threshold of, June 30th, July 1st. So if they get 30 hours in June and 10 more in July, and 40 is the appropriate number of hours for that specific post-test, then it would be appropriate to test them with the 40 hours that they've accumulated across what amounts to across the 2 different program years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. That clarifies a lot of things. So thank you.
You're welcome. And one thing to add also while we're talking about assessments is you want to make sure you're alternating those assessment forms. It's going to be tricky. It's start of the year, July 1st. If you're starting to assess students, you might have staff that are running your orientation that don't do data entry. They may just think, well, starting of the year, we're going to do Form 11 on the tape for everybody. And you might discover that for some students, Form 11 is the one that they had as a post-test back in March or April, and then you can't enter that. Let's say it was early February last year, so you can't roll it over, Form 11, and you try to enter Form 11 as a pretest this year, but then it might give you some trouble because of the post-test order. Now, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because if you change the level, that sort of thing. But it's one of those extra layers to be aware of, that you want to make sure when you can control it, you alternate those assessment forms. And the suggestion, I think basically we've already touched on this, the last bullet point here is just to create a list for rollover students that you anticipate will have rollover assessments, and those maybe more importantly that won't, that you want to maybe just keep an eye on. Again, scheduling post-testing around appropriate guidelines like the hours, but just to be aware of those and not have that oops moment in October. Janet, question.
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. My mic was having issues. I just want to clarify because maybe I was confused by the explanation, but I know that as long as I look at it this way, as a valid pretest, whatever last post-test they have is still valid for when they return in the new fiscal year, and July 1st is 0 hours. I was under the understanding that like whatever happened before July 1st is whatever happened. And then July 1st is 0 hours and they don't get tested again until they're over 40 as of July 1st, not including or counting any hours before that. So did I maybe misunderstand what you meant by like 30
possibly.
hours and then 10?
Possibly. My understanding is you're evaluating assessments on their own timeline, and that timeline does not reset as of July 1st. It's tricky because there's multiple layers to this conversation. So if we just look at this, let's look at just the layer you're referring to, which is post-testing hours and determining the appropriateness of a timing of a post-test based on hours. My understanding is that should not change based on when those hours were accumulated, in the sense that if it's June and July, those would all be hours that would accumulate together. What's tricky is we have a data system that puts up, like I said, there's 2 silos. So to go back to my previous example, you have 30 hours in June, you have 10 hours in July, the data system's never going to combine those. You're only going to see 30 and 10. It's up to you to come up with a process to determine when those 30 and 10 combine to give you 40 for an appropriate post-test timing. But as far as the students' progression within your agency and within their coursework, they're continuing on. So they should be post-tested, it's my understanding, for when they hit the hourly threshold, regardless of crossing program years. Because you would, if it was November and December and they accumulated 30 and 10, you'd say 40, and you'd say, if appropriate, this is when we would post-test. So June and July doesn't really change that really simplified layer of the equation. It just makes it more complex because it's harder to monitor. Does that make sense?
Check the room down there. It is being used, the tape test room.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm going to be
oh,
here
somebody else
past
is
3
talking.
o'clock.
I'm sorry.
So
Yep, okay, so I just muted everybody because I wasn't sure who that was. So Janet, if you have more to say, feel free to unmute.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so for example, if they ended the fiscal year on like having 20 hours and then in the summer, they have 30 more in the summer. So and I guess I'm thinking maybe from a, just the data entry perspective.
Yes,
The system itself, if you were to put in a test, would kind of, alert you like, you're doing
correct,
this too soon, you're doing this too
correct,
soon. So I think that's probably why my thinking is that because the hours go back to 0, it's not looking at it as it's time to
correct.
test them. So does that cause an issue if you are saying like 20 and then the 30 and then okay, you have 50? So technically by hours we should test them, but the system kind of flags it.
Correct. And the system flag really is just that notification, which also, if you recall, contains a little note saying make a note or document the reason why. So that's where you could document and say, this post test was given because we're following publishers' guidelines to post test at this number of hours determined, and we determined that from X number of hours through the end of the previous program year, plus the number of hours through the current moment in this current program year, in your case, to arrive at 50. And that's why you're post testing. So the eData system flags it for your benefit to make sure that you're realizing what you're doing, especially if there's oh wait, maybe it's the wrong person, or just to kind of give you a heads up. But if you know you're doing it correctly and you document properly, then that's the expectation, is that should be okay.
Okay, thank you.
I probably should give the caveat, of course, that if you have a large number of students or have seem to be running into this issue a lot and you're really just unsure, always check with your division advisor to be sure. You, of course, every year submit to your advisor an assessment policy, which has your procedures on how you deal with assessments specifically within your agency. Each of you has different methods. Some of you give paper and pencil, some give online. You use different assessments, which have different hourly recommendations. So there's a lot to this conversation, as you all know. I'm just telling you stuff you already know. But there's so much here, and there's nuance between how eData tracks things versus what the publisher's guides request. So obviously you can follow up with us with specific questions, as you have Daisy and Janet already, and Rosa. But if you have questions about like what is appropriate, what you should do, we always are going to refer you to your advisor. We're just simply giving you a heads up as to what you can do and what you can monitor in eData. And so that's kind of the difference between those two. Okay, so let me see if we have a question from Alex. For staff years of experience, should we be updating that field to close of system? In other words, as of June 30th, if we have a new staff who started. So the short answer to your question is yes, Alex. I would say update it as of when that individual, and when you check it, keep it up to date. That's what I would say. Keep it up to date. So if you check it today, Alex, and you determine that needs updated as of today, update it. Okay, so we're good there. All right, well, we've already done a lot of questions. And remember, this is the point where I wanted to remind you, if you have IET, please stay tuned after we wrap up the general questions, so to speak. We have some special content for you. I'm afraid it's not like a super amazing surprise or anything, but it's useful, hopefully. But yes, any other questions, comments, concerns? We've had lots of great questions so far. So any other thoughts about the end of the program year?
Hey, Michael, this is Kelly from Titusville.
Yes, Kelly, hi.
I just have a general question. Do you think we'll ever get the green highlighting back for assessments? It was just kind of like a positive affirmation.
Understood. And we, in our discussions overall about the idea of how to handle the highlighting, as it may or may not reflect it wasn't reflecting the NRS reporting procedure. So it needed to change. And we had a team discussion about it. And it was determined that for various reasons, that it just needed to just kind of go away entirely. That was not optimal, I realize, from a lot of your perspectives, since you sort of use that as a quick visual check to see if someone has a valid pretest. What we would just say is, for now, you can certainly refer to data checks and things where maybe somebody, the student's missing a pretest, there's data checks that cover that you can check that way. And stay tuned with changes that we are planning to implement in the template to consolidate and work on how assessments are monitored in the template. So it's a process. We're changing things, so it's going to take a little while. But like I said, your best bet in place of the highlighting will be to run those queries on the data checking page to determine whether someone's missing an assessment, especially a pretest.
Oh, we do that, Michael. It just makes me sad.
I understand. I
It's
hear you.
okay.
I hear you, and we knew that was a thing. We brought it up in the discussion, but we had to sort of decide from an imperfect list of options of how to handle it in eData. We can't,
Okay.
life is, as you know, your students and your agency life, I mean, nothing ever lines up perfectly in all situations for everything. So eData is a lot of compromises.
Okay, Michael, I'm looking for perfection, but okay.
Perfection is the goal, but I'm not sure we'll ever get there. All right, so I got a question here. Vrunda says, could you please explain the data validation process? What I would suggest, Vrunda, is actually for this one, I would find the documentation that I mentioned earlier, the policy highlight C-130, which talks about data reporting, and that's available on the Pennsylvania Department of Ed website under Adult Basic Ed Instruction. It's an administrative document. In the end of that document, there are directions for how to fulfill the data validation process. So for those of you who are facing this for the first time, please start there, because that is directions directly actually from how you will interact and get the information to your advisor. So once you have a chance to look at that data validation documentation, then you know whether it is a question that you have for your advisor, such as where do I send the form, that kind of thing, or a question for us, which is where do I get the numbers and the data validation in the template, for example. So what I would say is start with the document, understand it as best you can, and then if you have questions, please do let us know. But that's going to be the best order of operation there. Okay, very good questions today. Anyone else? And if I missed your question in the chat, please do unmute and just ask the question if you don't mind. I think I got everybody, but I don't want to miss anyone. There was a lot of activity there.
Michael, this is Jessica from IU5.
Yes,
I just
Jessica,
have a
hello.
quick question. Sadly, I missed the first half of our meeting. When will this be posted for me to rewatch? Is that usually like today or a couple of days?
It will not be today. The process is I forward this to the fine folks over at the Tech Project.
Okay.
And they must make this recording, since it's posted to the website, they must make it accessible.
Okay.
So they have a process to do that, including adding captioning and then uploading it. So as you might imagine, that takes some time.
Yeah.
And it's based around their availability. So I usually say, give it a few days.
Okay.
So just to be on the safe side, looking at the calendar now, I'm saying probably early next week.
Okay.
If there's some big delay or something, or something else comes up, I will let everyone know via the listserv, but you can look for this to be available sometime within the next few days.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. That's all we have. For those of you who do not have an IET, it was great seeing you. That's all we have for you today. If there's any other questions, of course, you know where to find us, phone call, email, and we'll be available for the duration between now and the 14th Friday. We will not be in on the 15th, sorry. So we'll see you all then. If you have an IET, please do stay on the line. We have a few things for you specifically. Otherwise, you are free to go. That's all we have.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome, Kelly. Take care. And if you're wondering what an IET is, Integrated Education and Training, if you don't know what it is, you are free to go because the next part will not concern you. And for those of you saying thank you, you are most welcome. Have a great rest of the week. I'm going to give it another minute or so, let folks trickle out, but then we'll get started because they want to see what an IET discussion is. You're welcome to stay. I just figure you'll be bored. All right, so let's go to that IET stuff. I think I see a lot of names that I think you do have IETs. So this is specifically for those of you with an IET. Bear in mind, you may have done all of these things already. This was a reminder that the division wanted us to review with all of you that have IET programming. And the specific review that we're just going to talk about here briefly in general is the labeling, if you will, of records in eData. So as you might know, your IET programming is quite special. You likely all had to work very hard to get it in place. And as you work with the students and instructors and everyone that's involved with the IET, as you record their activities, you're likely going to be putting most of that information in eData in either a class record or an adult record, or really both. And so there's some special things. Rather than go through all of the details now, I just will, of course, refer you to the most up-to-date version of the system manual glossary, which is available alongside the template on the PA Adult Ed Resources website. In that document, in the how-to, the manual part for classes and adults, there are references to IET. Even if you use since it's a PDF, if you use the find function and just cycle through all the references to IET and just make sure that every reference to IET you have covered with your crew. Highlights for that basically are for your classes. You want to make sure your class names have IET in the title. You want to make sure that the special program type has the appropriate IET selection. There's two options, with or without credential. And for adults, you want to make sure that you're following the guidelines, or not guidelines, they're not guidelines, following the guidance, if you will, for adult records, using those agency specific goals for IETs, and then also the new tab that you have in adult records for IETs. Additionally, also in the system manual glossary, there's an appendix at the end. I think it's Appendix A. I think it's the only one we have, that refers to IET specifics on how to do some of what I just mentioned in those items. So I'm intentionally leaving out some of the details because I want you to go to the manual glossary, check things. If you want to copy and paste how we say to do it from the manual glossary into eData, please do, because we want to have this as consistent as possible. If all of you who have IETs document the same way from how it's described in the manual glossary, the statistician will have a much easier time putting together all of your efforts for the state of Pennsylvania and representing what we're doing in the state as far as our work with the IET and with students in IETs. So that's really it. I just wanted to really emphasize that. That is largely on behalf of the division, just really reinforcing the specific nature of IETs and how they're documented in eData. Do any of you have any questions about those? If not, and as I said, many of you may have already done that. When I looked through, I saw a lot of documentation that looked like it was consistent with the manual glossary. But again, if it's not marked IET, I'm not going to see it. So that's the key, is I can look and it can look good, but if it's missing, it's hard for us to find that. And that's the key for the data person, is we need to make sure that these things are marked well. So if you get a chance to look at the manual glossary, check your items, that would be optimal. And then any questions you may find or encounter while you're doing that, of course, let us know. And we may refer you to your advisor, of course, depending on the nature of the question. But if it's certainly eData related and comes from the manual glossary, we should be able to help you out if you have any questions. That's all I have. So you got a little extra credit for staying a little bit late. This recording, as I said, will be posted next week. You are all free to go, but if you have a question, feel free to hang out and we can answer those
Thanks,
questions.
Michael.
Well,
Thank you.
you're most welcome. Be well.
You too.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye.